Once again, I'd like to welcome everyone to this month's Wildlife for Lunch webinar. Today's webinar is on Getting to Know Your Quail, presented by Dr. Dale Rollins, Texas A&M AgriLife Extension and the Quail Decline Initiative. Today's webinar is made possible through funding provided by the San Antonio Livestock Exposition Incorporated, and it's hosted by the Texas Wildlife Association and Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. Dr. Rollins, with that, you should have the controls.
Okay, thank you, Clint, and welcome to the participants this afternoon. It's always a pleasure to talk with folks interested in quail, and when you can do it from the comfort and convenience of your own house and not have to drive, that makes it just a little bit better. So appreciate y'all tuning in today. Just a little bit on my background. I've worked for the last 32 years as a wildlife specialist for Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. Prior to that, I was raised in southwestern Oklahoma. I tell people I've been a student of quail for 56 years. I'm 61 years old, and I heard my first bobwhite whistle when I was 5 years old outside our kitchen window south of Hollis, Oklahoma. And my mother said, "Do you hear that bird? It calls to you. It calls its name." And I tell people after 56 years, it's still calling to me. So I appreciate y'all's interest, and we'll get started in getting to know your quail. I would like to thank Texas A&M AgriLife and the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department for the Reversing the Quail Decline Initiative, of which this webinar is one portion. We do different things around the state: Quail Appreciation Days, Quail Masters, various research and education opportunities. If you'd like to learn more about that, if you'll send an email to me, I'll forward some information to you. Well, for those of you that are quail hunters and have been quail hunters, you know that over the last 15 months, we've gone from rags to riches. We saw incredible, spectacular, remarkable recovery of our quail last year. It's what I call a jubilee year, referring back to what a jubilee year is in the book in the Old Testament, about how every 50 years the slaves were freed, all debts were forgiven. That kind of happened to us as far as quail. But we know that sooner or later we'll be going from riches to rags. We hope it's not this year, because things are looking really good. On the right there, you'll see our trapping records from the Rolling Plains Quail Research Ranch, which is located in Fisher County. We caught a record number of birds, 3,149 individuals last November. Trapped again in March, and we caught 2,940. We entered this year's breeding season with a little less than a bird per acre, and that is incredible. And we're seeing good nesting activity right now. So who knows what this fall will hold for us. We hope for the best. Give a little overview of what we hope to talk about. We'll talk about some of the various adaptations that quail have in terms of their anatomy and their behavior, how those two things dictate what their habitat needs should be, how we as aspiring students of quail can monitor various metrics that are important to quail and will make us a better and more learned student of quail. If you've been to any of the programs that I do around the state, I've made a career out of appreciating things, and I don't just mean in the context of value or admire highly, although that is very key, and when we're talking about bobwhites. But I've done feral hog appreciation days, predator appreciation days, brush appreciation days. Got a fire appreciation day next week. And on most of those, I'm really focusing more in on the aspect of being able, let me get my marker here going. I'm wanting to focus on the context to be cautiously or sensitively aware of, or to judge with heightened awareness. So I hope you'll consider those two contexts as we try to appreciate quail and their management more over the next 45 minutes. Earlier I perused the list of attendees, and I saw a couple of names that I recognized, a couple of Quail Master alumni from up in the Wichita Falls area, so appreciate you guys signing on today. And I exhort all of you to become a more scholarly student of quail. Now, that doesn't just mean that you're reading books or internet articles or whatever, but that you're out there amongst them. You're out there listening and learning every day, and I'll share with you several different opportunities for growth or continuing education. I do have several ulterior motives when I call you a student of quail. Those include the old Chinese proverb that we use as the motto of the bobwhite brigade: tell me and I forget, show me and I remember, involve me and I understand. So when you as an individual are out there collecting data, doing some of this type of on the ground, on the back 40 research, it benefits you in a number of ways. The old biblical notion that the eye of the master fattens the calf, the more that you understand about that habitat, the better prepared you are to manage it. And the best fertilizer is the footprint of the farmer. So the more that you can get out of the office, get away from your personal computing device and spend some time out there in the weeds and brush, better off you'll be in many respects. As my health is better in November, as Hadila Babcock wrote. I will make reference to a number of webisodes related to quail post, as Texas Wildlife Association calls them. I've done about 20 or 25 of these on various topics. They're available to you on YouTube. I could give you several long internet addresses, but I think you'd be better served by just going to YouTube and then searching for Quail and Rollins, and it'll bring most of those up. So I'll make reference today to several of those that are online, but I encourage you for your homework to go home and watch some of those. I'm always amazed when I show up at a particular meeting or a small town or whatever, and the guy walked up to me in Anson the other day when I was getting gas. He said, "You're on YouTube," and he hadn't even met me. So word gets around. Continue to watch those things. When I say getting to know your quail, typically I'm talking about anatomy, I'm talking about physiology. We dissect quail. We do this at the Bobwhite Brigade. Every kid starts the camp off with a cadaver in front of him. If you've ever been to Quail Masters, you know the same routine. And we go through that quail from stem to stern. We learn him from inside out, and we talk about how the various anatomical features serve as both adaptations, but sometimes as chains to prevent that bird from being able to exploit certain situations. So we have to better understand it. I'd like to think about it as a small block Chevy 327 motor, and the more we know about the pistons and the timing chain and the various components, the better the mechanic we can be. It was back in the day. I'd like to start off today with a little pretest. I'm not going to keep score. I'm not going to. The computer is not going to be in a place for you to register your particular choice on the computer screen. So we're going to go through it fairly quickly. But I've got 20 questions, and I'd just like to do this, and I'll tell you why at the end. How old was the bird on the left? How old was this bird? I'm only going to give you about 10 seconds to think about it, and we're going to move on. So you've got an answer in your mind, and the correct answer is that bird is more than 1 year old. We know that because we look at these feathers right here, contrasted with these right here on the juvenile bird. These are called the primary coverts. If they have small white tips or buffy-colored tips, they're a juvenile bird, less than 1 year old. If they're like this, older bird, more than 1 year old. Obviously, if we're hunting quail, we like to see 70 to 80% of our birds have this, indicates good hatch. On the sites that I hunted this year, we had 90 to 92% juvenile birds, which again, pretty incredible. How many parts are there to a quail's stomach? 1, 2, 3, or 4? Correct answer is 2. The proventriculus and the gizzard. You know the gizzard, probably know what the gizzard is. There is a glandular stomach just before that. And so those are the 2 parts to the quail's stomach. Which of the following is considered to be the perfect quail food? Corn, milo, sunflower seeds, doveweed seeds, or insects? If you said corn, you're incorrect. Correct choice is insects. We call them MREs, meals ready to eat for quail. They have everything that a quail needs, and quail will be eating insects whenever insects are available. Typically, they'll make up about 20 to 30% of the annual diet. Which of these predators is most likely responsible for this evidence? Here's a bird. Here are the wings, the breastbone. This is the radio transmitter that was on the bird. So who done it? A hawk, snake, coyote, or bobcat? Correct answer, hawk. That indicates the characteristic sign here is the fact that the wings have been clipped off and the meat has been stripped off of the keel, off of the sternum, off the breastbone here. And so that is classical physical evidence of hawk predation. How many functional ovaries does a quail hen have? Now, you never know when I'm trying to trick you, so do a little critical thinking here. The obvious answer is 2, but that's incorrect. The correct answer is 1. Most birds, quail included, only have one functional ovary, and it's always on the left side. Just an interesting anatomical fact. About how many potential nest sites should a manager seek to provide per acre in order to provide good nesting cover for bobwhites? Here you have a gentleman that is measuring bunch grass availability. Again, if you've been through Quail Masters or a Quail Appreciation Day, you know what we're doing there. So what's the correct answer? Correct answer, 300. You should strive to have about 300 basketball-sized bunch grasses per acre. If you're a cowboy and you're sitting on your horse, that'd be about every 11 feet apart. So you ought to be able to throw your lariat from one to the next. If you don't have enough, what are you going to do to improve it? Defer your grazing or rest your pasture for a year or more. What does prickly pear provide for quail? Food, water, nesting cover, escape cover, or all of the above? This is a pretty easy one. Correct answer, all of the above. Quail will eat the fruits in the September-October time frame. Those are full of water, so they get to eat the seeds of it as well. They will nest, especially in areas where grazing has been too heavy. Quail will nest in prickly pear quite commonly. The nests that are in prickly pear survive at about twice the rate of those that nest in grass until you reach a certain threshold of grass clumps, and it does provide escape cover, especially the taller pear, as I would call it, South Texas pear. Very important when a raptor's after you. How many eggs are typically found in a bobwhite's nest? 2, 4, 8, or 12? Correct answer, most years 12. I'm excited to say that our reports on early nesting attempts at the Rolling Plains Quail Research Ranch, we're seeing 16 or more eggs. I got a report from one of our technicians this morning, found a nest with 22 eggs in it. That is our record. We've also had a 20-egg clutch described to us this year. So these early nesting attempts are typically the largest nesting attempts. Quail will re-nest several times as need be, but the clutch size will decrease as we get on into the summer. Until this past summer, bobwhite abundance in West Texas over the past 10 years was what? Steady, increasing, declining slightly, or at record lows. And if you're a quail hunter, you know that until last year, it had been at record lows. And again, courtesy of that moisture we received in the Jubilee year that we observed, we made a spectacular rebound. Most time, quail population can't do any more than double from one year to the next, but our quail population at the Quail Research Ranch increased almost 5-fold, and some of the blue quail populations in the high plains of Texas increased by 12,000%. Incredible. Mathematically impossible, they did it. How much does an adult blue quail weigh? Half an ounce, 6 ounce, 300 grams, or 1.2 kilograms? Correct answer, 6 ounces. Actually, 6.5 ounces for a blue. There'll be a few grams, typically about 10 grams heavier than a bobwhite. So we typically say they're 6 ounces and stand 6 inches tall. Those are both metrics you'll want to keep in mind in a second. What is the core body temperature of a blue quail in degrees Fahrenheit? Core body temperature. We had that quail and we were able to take a cloacal temperature of it. What would it register, you think? Correct answer, 108 degrees. So quail have very high body temperature. They sometimes work at the edge of thermal brinkmanship in terms of their body temperature to avoid hyperthermia. How many species of quail occur naturally in Texas? 2, 3, 4, or 6? Correct answer, 4. Can you name them? You got the blue quail, bobwhite, the gambles, and the Montezuma, or sometimes called the Burns quail, out in the Davis Mountains region. Only 3 of those can be hunted. The Montezuma quail cannot be hunted in Texas. What organ does a quail have that affords an eat-and-run lifestyle? Crop, proventriculus, uropygial gland, or the cecap? Correct answer, the crop. The crop functions like a Ziploc bag. It sits there on the top of the breast muscle. It allows quail to get out and hustle and pick up seeds very quickly because they're in more danger in the open than they are underneath the brush. So then they move back to the brush and spend the majority of the day in the brush in relative security and digest their food from that point. At what age and days can chicks begin to make short flights? 7, 12, 21, or 35 days? Correct answer, 12 days. I'm hoping that some of you have already spotted some broods this year. I personally have not seen one yet, but I get brood reports daily of people that are seeing some already as old as maybe 2 weeks old out around the Midland, Odessa area with blue quail. So keep your eyes open. I would appreciate any reports that you have on brood sightings at your particular locale. What is the incubation period for scale quail eggs? 21, 23, 28 days, or unknown? Correct answer is the same for bobwhites, 23 days, not 21. That's in chickens. Something else that may be interesting to notice is that if you look at the blue quail eggs, they'll have this gold flecking on them typically, whereas a bobwhite's egg will be pure white, if you will. Woo, they're getting tougher now. What is the lining of the gizzard called? The rostrum, the coilum, the nictitating membrane, or the cloaca? The gizzard has a very tough sandpapery type, sandpapery type lining because that's where the bird essentially chews, if you will, its food by grinding those seeds there. And that structure is called the coilum. You can impress your friends and family with what you learned today. What is the behavior of panting called in quail? When it gets above about 92 or 3 degrees, bobwhites will pant if they're not able to reduce their body temperature by being in the shade or whatever. And that is referred to as gular flutter. That's the way that a quail is able to maintain its temperature at 108 degrees when it's hot. How many teeth does a quail have during its lifetime? Now, this one has been photoshopped, and you don't really see this, although I think it would be a handy adaptation if quail had these piranha-like teeth. So how many teeth does a quail have? None, 1, 16, or 32? Might be thinking I'm trying to kid you, and I guess I am. Correct answer is 1. It has an egg tooth, and that's the way it cuts itself out of the shell. That egg tooth disappears within a day after hatching. Which of these is an accipiter hawk? A red-tailed hawk, a northern harrier, a Cooper's hawk, or all of the above? Accipiters are the F-16s of the hawk world. They are a bobwhite's worst natural enemy, in my opinion. Adult bobwhites. And the correct answer is Cooper's hawk. A Cooper's hawk, I tell people that a Cooper's hawk to a quail, if you're a fan of horror movies, a Cooper's hawk is Jason meets Freddy Krueger. Last question. What kind of predator would leave this kind of eggshell evidence at a dummy nest? We incorporate dummy nests, chicken eggs, placed out sometimes to study the behavior or study the nesting success of quail. And so our nest bowl was right here. Now you'll see here's some eggshells. That's one egg. We had 3 chicken eggs in there. There's one of them. There's one of them. And there's one of them. So based on that physical evidence, let's do a little quail CSI here. And tell me who you think your culprit might have been. A skunk, a snake, a male raccoon, or a female raccoon. The evidence suggests a female raccoon and her kittens. Female raccoon might have grabbed this one of the kittens might have grabbed this one, another kitten might have grabbed this one. So that's the type of evidence that we associate with either a female raccoon with kittens or possibly an opossum. Okay, if you scored 90% or above, I want you as a covey leader at Bobwhite Brigade. If you scored less than, let's say if you scored less than 70, you need to attend as a student of Bobwhite Brigade or make sure you go to Quail Masters. We'll get you straightened out in the long run. Now I want you to think like a quail. Given some of those anatomical things we talked about during the IQ test, shrink yourself down, morph yourself down to the dimensions of a quail. You're now standing tall at 6 inches in the saddle and you weigh 6 ounces. Ask yourself this question. How many bobcats do you whoop? How many Cooper's hawks do you stick your tongue out at? And the answer is 1, if you get my message, because after that he's going to nail you. So my point is that quail are a very paranoid bird. You don't typically see quail out in the open strutting around like a turkey tom or an emu or an ostrich. They're typically skittering back and forth from hiding spot to hiding spot. Maybe you've heard them do this. I call that nervous chatter. Birds, quail, and bobwhites are paranoid. As Woody Allen said, you'd be paranoid too if someone was out to get you. And quail are near the bottom of the food chain, so there's a lot of things that like to enjoy them, not just us. I often preface my talks about what we can, or how we manage for quail by setting this as a foundation. A quail's life, its anatomy, its physiology, its behavior is dictated by the threat of predation. Everything that a quail does has been shaped over the millennia because they've had a lot of things after them. That doesn't mean that I'm mad necessarily at all the predators, because the same behaviors that I like to see in a quail, the covey flush, those kind of things, are a function of that type of arms race between predator and prey. So I'm not necessarily saying that we're not going to try to nuke the predators, although the threat of predation is an important consideration. Every time that bobwhite goes, he's telling everybody where he's at. And he's doing that because he wants to attract a mate. But every hawk, every bobcat hears that too, so he's putting his life in danger to raise a family. I tell people that raising a family can be a hazard to your health. And I suspect most of you would say amen. When that quail hen is incubating those eggs for 23 days, well, she actually has about 42 to 45 days invested in a nest that hatches. And to be able to remain hidden, keep those nests hidden from a sea of predators is pretty incredible. Nationwide, the average hatch rate on bobwhites is only about 28%. So you've got to figure we hope to do better than that. Some of our nesting accounts out at the research ranch have been somewhere between 55 and 75%. That tells us we've got predators, but we've got really good nesting cover. And a good defense, in this case, is the best offense. There's death from above, there's death in the tall grass, and if it wasn't enough to have those natural predators, then we've got some others that we've introduced ourselves, like feral hogs and feral house cats and so forth. So there are times when you study quail and you wonder, how do we ever have enough quail that we could afford to hunt them and enjoy them? And when we see a year like last year, again, it just blows your mind biologically to see how they were able to outdo their enemies last year. For a 6-ounce quail to attack a 2-ton truck takes a lot of moxie. I don't know if you've ever seen quail attack a vehicle. If I have people out about this time of year, I show them a whistle that will make quail do this. It works very good for photography's sake, and it's as impressive an example of wildlife calling as I do. So if you've ever seen that, or if you've ever tried to whistle a bird, I'm not going to do it on the microphone today because I don't know you well enough, and I don't want anybody to ever shoot a bird on the ground, so you got to learn that in person. Quail have certain adaptations. They have anatomical adaptations, they have behavioral adaptations, and they have physiological adaptations. If you'll go to that webisode on getting to know your quail, I'll lead you. It's a 2-part webisode, and you'll learn more about the various adaptations and how they function to help quail survive in the sea of predators. Organs like the crop play an important role. The gizzard, how does the gizzard help? Well, a quail doesn't have to stand out there and chew its food like you and I do. The gizzard for a quail is analogous to our molar teeth, but we stand out there and chew. Well, the quail doesn't have to stand out in the open. It can go back, let that gizzard basically chew its food for it. And then the reproductive organs. Reproductive organs are very, very small in a bird in the winter for weight-saving purposes. The testes, for example, might be the size of a number 8 shot, number 7.5 shot back in early March. Right now, those testes are about the size of a 50 caliber muzzleloader ball because they're active. Same way with the ovary, again, always on the left side. Back in the winter, it would have been about half the size of a dime. Right now, it would be about 4 times larger than that, with all types of little, look like a cluster of grapes, with each one of those grapes being an ova, which is going to develop a meal, which will develop into an egg. What song serves as the national anthem of quail management? Is it Free Bird? Is it Killing Me Softly with His Song? Living on the Edge by Aerosmith? Or Live Fast, Love Hard, Die Young, and Leave a Beautiful Memory by Pear and Young? Give that just a little bit of thought. Correct answer. And if we were at a Quail Appreciation Day and you had that cadaver in front of you, we would be dissecting that bird to the tune of Leonard Skinner's Free Bird. The key lyrics therein, don't get that. The key lyrics therein are, and this bird you cannot change. So since we can't change the bird, we can't talk about hybridizing quail or in the beef cattle sense, putting a little ear on that quail so it'll hustle better like we might do for our Hereford cattle. Can't do that with quail. We've got to learn to live with the quail that we have. It is the best suited one. It's been selected for over thousands of years. And we've got to learn to live with that one. So we have to be able to adjust the habitat to fit the quail's need. We can't change the quail to fit the habitat. This is an exercise we did at Bobwhite Brigade called Run for Your Life. I use it as an example that we've got to appreciate a quail's needs and dilemmas every day of the year. Too often we just think about quail from November through the end of February, but as a quail manager, we got to be thinking about quail. We got to be living a quail's life 365 days out of the year so we can understand its management needs and dilemmas and how our management has impacts on this. In Run for Your Life, you have these hula hoops which serve as quail houses or oak bushes or plum thickets. The cadets, if they are within one of those, they are safe from the hawks. We have an accipiter hawk, we have a broad-winged hawk here, but they have to get out and feed. And so by doing that, they're exposed to their predators. If we decide as a rancher that we've got too much brush, we need to come in here and clear out some of this brush. We will role play that, take up those hula hoops, and where does the advantage go? It goes from the quail very rapidly to the predator. Just to show some of the consequences if we don't consider quail needs in our management plan. Got an article coming up in the June Texas Wildlife magazine called Naked and Afraid after the TV series. And right now, this picture on the left is where we're at right here. This hen's come off the nest there. She's got her chicks there. Those look like to be about 2 weeks old. They weigh about 1/4 of an ounce and stand right at 2 inches tall when they come out of that egg. they are defenseless. And there are a lot of things, a lot of hazards out there that are ready to take them out of the population. Like I said, as you study quail, there are times when they are more fragile than wet tissue paper, other times when they're tougher than barbed wire. And we hope to learn more about it and create a habitat, again, that allows them to exploit and do well, survive their odyssey. The two things that we want to talk about, if we're talking about the habitat, we're typically talking about nesting cover. When I say nesting cover, again, basketball size bunch grasses like this little blue stem in this case, prickly pear about the size of a hula hoop or a little larger, and then escape cover. Where can a quail go to get away from that hawk, or what I call quail houses? Could be anything like lote bush, tickle tongue, greenbrier. Where are those storm cellars at when they run into a storm? And when I say, I don't just mean a hailstorm, although that could be appropriate too, but I'm talking about when a Cooper's hawk is on your butt. Where do you go to get away from them? Again, think about how your habitat looks, not from your perspective standing there. You're standing there looking at it from 5.5 to 6.5 feet high. Do like I asked this gentleman to do. Lie down, close your right eye, look at your top eye. You're looking at the world now from a 6-inch perspective. Your view of the world will change. If you want to look at it through the eyes of a chick, you close your top eye, open your bottom eye. Be aware of what your habitat looks like at quail's eye height. There are a lot of things that we can talk about as far as engaging you as a student of quail and an aspiring quail manager. Your ability to get out there right now and do whistle counts. Our interns are doing whistle counts every Tuesday and Thursday. They started yesterday. We've got people listening all around the state with the Texas Quail Index. There are a lot of ears popped skyward right now, again, listening for that. How many different bobwhites do I hear whistling? And how many total whistles do I hear in a 5-minute period? There is a webisode that you can go to about how to conduct spring call count. He'll talk to you about that. The dummy nest. This is a really valuable exercise. It's homework if you're in Quail Masters, if you're part of the Texas Quail Index. They'll start doing that here in a couple of weeks. A very valuable exercise that allows you to estimate what hatch rate is or nest success is and whether your management is conducive to a higher hatch rate. One of the basic skills that you need to know is how to age a quail. And we do this by looking at those primary coverts that we referred to earlier. I'll show them again in a second. But that's the first thing that I do. When my dog brings me a quail when we're quail hunting, first thing I do is I spread that wing. Was it a young bird or an old bird? It's just basic knowledge that anybody that's interested in quail needs to know. We'd like to know about what percentage of the birds are young birds. And again, we would hope it's somewhere between 70 and 80% or higher. And again, here's just a refresher. Here's the adult bird. Again, this is the top side of the wing. Now, don't look at the bottom side. This is the top side of the wing. Those are called the primary coverts. If you see those little white tips, that's a juvenile bird. You'd hope that 70 to 80% of your birds have wings like that. The dummy nest webisode, again, it tells you exactly how to set these out. It's not expensive. It's not difficult. It takes a little time. But there are a lot of lessons to be learned by setting up those dummy nests. And it's a homework exercise that I would exhort all of you to participate in. A little review question here. Which anatomical feature affords quail an eat and run lifestyle? The crop, a light-colored breast muscle, the uropygial gland, or the egg tube? And hopefully you remember that's the crop. I told you the first thing that I do when my dog delivers a bird to me is I look at see whether it's a young bird or an old bird. Well, I'm out of order here. Defer that for a minute. From a habitat standpoint, we want to recognize, again, what are the components of good quail habitat and what does our management do, either in a plus or a minus, a pro or a con sense, as we think about it from a quail's perspective. Now, if you're looking at this side and I ask you to score, a lot of times I'll put slides up here and I'll ask you to score them on a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being pitiful, 10 being perfect. How do you think you'd rate that particular site right there? I'd give that a 9, maybe a 10. That is a beautiful sight. I've been on that ranch in Fisher County. You see a diversity of brush. You see things like cat claw mimosa. You see some prickly pear. You see the little draw here that has, there's probably 8 or 10 different species of brush in here. There's a good quail house right there. It's got adequate grass. That's a good looking site for quail. If you've got that kind of landscape, you've done about what you can do to ensure that you've got good quail numbers. If I go back to that slide for just a minute, what part of that landscape would not be usable by quail? Do you think all of it is? There is all of that usable by quail? I would argue it probably is. That illustrates a phenomena that we call usable space. Usable space is basically how much of my property is usable by quail over the entire year. Let me stress, over the entire year. And it's typically dictated by 2 management decisions, brush management and our grazing management. Now, our rain, our precipitation trumps both of those, but that's not always under our control. So of the factors that we have control over, our brush management and our grazing management are the 2 most important. There's a lot of other things we can do, but those 2, consideration of those 2 needs to be at the top of your list. Usable space, this is a good example on a ranch in Stonewall County. After some brush work has been implemented, you see that the rancher has left motts of trees out there. He's taken care of the woody plant needs for quail. This particular site is well managed as far as grazing. There's adequate bare ground. A lot of people will say, you know, quail got to have some bare ground. Typically, that's somebody wanting to get the grass leaves from you for grazing, and they'll argue that grass can get too thick for quail. It can. I've seen it a couple of times in my career, but that is rarely a weak link for us in West Texas, at least. If you're in Victoria, different situation. And then we want these again interspersed because the breast muscle of a quail prohibits quail from flying from this point over to that point. A flight of a quail is going to be maybe 100 yards kind of thing. So that's a physiological limitation, and we have to be able to address that with our habitat layout. This is an outline of the Rolling Plains Quail Research Ranch up in Fisher County. It's a 4,700 acre property, and we fly helicopter counts as one of the ways that we assess our quail abundance. We fly helicopter counts in November and again in March. And what we've done here, this is for the first 2 years, 2007 and 2008, but one of the graduate students did some spatial density modeling. Basically, think about it as a thunderstorm map on tonight's weather. The darker the area, the higher number of quail. The lighter the area, the lower number of quail. So I use that as an example to be a student of patternology. You need to have an idea of where on your property your quail numbers are best and where your quail numbers are weakest, and study both of those. What is it about this area that makes it such a good quail habitat in the anti-pasture, while over here in the dock pasture, we don't have that many quail? Well, a student of quail would be able to say, aha, well, the honey holes are characterized by more species of brush, better quail houses, better interspersion, whereas the more open areas, in our case, the western side of the ranch, the brush has been managed too closely over the last 40 years, and we need to let it grow back. So strategically, we want to be able to take an area like this, study it, say, I'd like to be able to cut and paste that kind of situation over here. And whether that's grazing management or brush management or just time, those are decisions you've got to think about. A knowledge of plant succession. Plant succession is defined as the orderly, predictable process of change in a plant community over time, and it is our basic tool for managing habitat. So I call Rollins' rules of succession a 2-point process based on know your plants, know which plants are important to your species of interest, whether that's black baldy cows or bobwhites or white-faced steers or white-tailed deer. and then know how to manipulate those plants. And using the tools that Aldo Leopold identified back in the 30s, what he called the axe, the plow, the cow, and fire. So we use those tools, modern variations thereof, like this excavator. You can see little Annie here studying that, and she's recognizing that that excavator can be a force for good or not for good for quail. And it depends on the application and the mindset of the operator. One of the other things that I always look at when I get a bird in hand, I palpate, I feel the crop area. Has it got anything in it? If so, I'll take time to break that open and look at it. Here's the crop right here. Again, it functions like a Ziploc bag. This one was a blue quail shot in back in the early 2000s out around Fort Stockton. I want you to look at the fat around that bird. That is a fat quail. That fat is important if we get into February blizzard. Typically, a quail has about 3 or 4 days worth of body reserves as far as fat. They're burning a lot of energy to stay warm in cold weather. This bird is particularly well endowed with fat stores. And when I opened that crop up, it was all fillery, Texas fillery, which is a wonderful plant that we grow in a wet year out here in West Texas. It's impressive to me that we have that kind of fat deposition as a result of eating a green. Something really good about fillery. Here's more typical looking crop contents. Broke it open, and it's got various kinds of seeds. It's got milo in there. Apparently it's been baiting the roads and had quail feeders out. And has some other little seeds, plains bristlegrass, or some mustard seeds and that kind of thing. So my point being that if you'll break the crop open and store those contents and scatter them out, you can become, again, a better diagnostician of quail management because you'll know what plants are important on your particular property. You can also take those seeds, put them on a flatbed scanner, put a ruler next to them, scan them at about 300 dots per inch, and if you don't know those seeds, we'll send them in to me, and if I don't know them, I've got friends and colleagues that can probably identify them. So we call that the digital plant press. There's a webisode on that, and it will allow you to, again, from the sake of your computer with a flatbed scanner, be able to be a better student of plants. I'm often thrust in the role of public defender when I'm talking at a field day because I pick up some plants and I talk about plants with virtues that others don't always see. So I always cite Emerson's universal constant. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "And what is a weed but a plant whose virtues have yet to be discovered?" If I'm looking at this particular scene with my cowboy hat on, I see some plants out there that don't mean a hill of beans to me. I'd really like to have more of that one, that little blue stem, and some of those broadleaf weeds. But if I'm looking at it in a quail's eye, I recognize things like sunflower and doveweed. All those are steak and taters for quail. So I have a different mindset if I'm looking at the world through the eyes of quail. That forces me to do some kind of strange things in terms of trying to tell people to reconsider their plant paradigms, if you will. Cadenhead's corollary I developed when I was talking about grass burrs. A rancher asked me one time, had me pinned, and said, "Just what good are these for quail?" And after I was sweating bullets for about 30 seconds, my colleague, J.F. Cadenhead, came to my rescue when he said, "They slow down bird dogs, don't they?" End quote. And that is a very powerful message that I have entitled Cadenhead's Corollary, and it tells us that thou shalt not judge the value of a plant to quail based solely on food value. Some plants do other things besides provide food. And then I have these ladies here. This was a couple of weeks ago at a Women of the Lands workshop the Texas Wildlife Association held. And I have these ladies holding up a broomweed while they recite the pledge to broomweed that goes like this. I pledge allegiance to common broomweed and to the cover for which it provides. One canopy over quail, continuous, providing usable space for bobwhites. So again, if you think about the world through the eyes of a quail, you think about some plants quite differently than the mainstream. And the more you know those plants, the more you'll be able to appreciate, be able to ask what good are they, how do they function to help quail or other forms of wildlife, And again, if you'll take that digital scanner, that $79 scanner you got on your computer desk there, you can make these types of plant specimens and then put them together in a PowerPoint, print them off on glossy photo paper, and you've got your coffee table book that you put together, and it's quite impressive. There is a webisode on that again, the digital plant press. This is an important philosophy from a habitat standpoint. We've got to think about our brush. We've got to think about our grass or our herbaceous cover. But how much is just right? Should I be managing quail can survive where they don't have very much brush at all with a lot of grass, or they can survive over here where they don't have much grass with a lot of brush? As a quail hunter, you'd like to be somewhere over here, like this particular scene in Stonewall County. The point being that there is quite a bit of slack, as we'd call it. It's just not one particular point on that curve. There's a range of values that will satisfy the quail's need, but they're going to be a sliding scale based on how much grass you got versus how much brush you have. Number of ways to evaluate quail habitat. In my opinion, one that works very well, it has what I call the cowboy seal of approval, is the SHET technique, softball habitat evaluation technique. SHET, be careful with your enunciation. It revolves about the use of a softball. Everybody has played slow pitch softball at some point in their life, so they can relate to the things that I'm going to bring out to you. The quail is the softball. This particular softball has restricted flight written on it. A blue dot softball has restricted flight. It's by design that you can't hit a softball as far as you do a baseball. And the point being that a quail has restricted flight stamped on its breast muscle because it has that light colored breast muscle. It can't fly like a dove. To a dove, 5 to 7 miles from food to water is not a big deal. For a quail, it'll never happen. So it has to have that interspersion, that patchwork quilt design over about a 30-acre area, which is the home range for bobwhites over most of Texas. One of the key points is you ought to be able to throw that softball in the air from one quail house to the next across the landscape. I don't have the next slide in this series, but this particular individual, if he turned around and showed his face, it's Nolan Ryan, the Hall of Pitcher fame for the Texas Rangers, 7 perfect games. And I tell people, if he's throwing the softball, well, then your brush is probably a little too far apart. But most of us, we want to be able to throw it from one quail house to the next. Think about the softball field. There are 10 defensive players. They're a little bit more dense down here in the infield, scattered out more in the outfield. Strategically, we want a quail house everywhere we've got a defensive player. Again, a quail house, some examples would be things like plum thickets, lote bush, catclaw acacia, taller South Texas type prickly pear. All of those, something about the size of a Volkswagen Beetle, dense above, open at ground level. That's what we're talking about for a quail house. And if you're got a smartphone, there is an app for that. Last year, in conjunction with the Quail Decline Initiative, Dr. Cathy and some of his interns down at College Station developed an app for smartphones called Northern Bobwhite Habitat Evaluation. Works pretty well. I would encourage you to try it. It's free. You can go to the App Store and download that, get out on the back 40 and start it and walk through and just see if you don't get a better idea of what the weak links are for quail. There's also a publication if you want more information and want to go into more fine-tuning or finer level type habitat evaluation. But for most of you, I would be happy if you just had that softball habitat evaluation technique, that SHET model in mind as you think about habitat. But as we begin to wind down, you got to appreciate that this guy is pretty astute. He recognizes those thunderheads and that moisture that's going to come there from is a powerful driver for quail management in Texas, especially in West and South Texas. 50 to 90% of the variation that we see in quail populations is probably attributable to weather. But the rest of it is attributable to his management, his brush management, his grazing management. These are the things that we can control to where our land is prepared to take advantage of that when it comes. So, who holds the key? I think that's a rhetorical question, and the landowner holds the key. And I often espouse the idea that a rancher with bird dogs is the best friend a quail has. Let me repeat that. A rancher with bird dogs is the best friend a quail has. Because if this is his avocation, he's mindful of what his vocation does, his grazing management, his brush management, and he typically will take those into consideration and be ready to compensate or compromise as he thinks about things like stocking rate. So as a land manager, you ask yourself, does my management favor quail or does it favor the quail's enemies? Which way am I pushing that teeter-totter? Is it leaning towards the favor, the benefit of the quail, or is it leaning more towards the quail's enemies? That's a powerful thing for you to think about every time you strike up that caterpillar, every time you're out there thinking about increasing stocking rates or whatever. There are several resources. I'll just mention a couple. At the Quail Research Ranch, if you go to quailresearch.org, you can sign up for the eQuail newsletter. This is a monthly e-newsletter. It comes out on the first of every month. It'd be worthwhile for you to get that as an aspiring student of quail. We also have a Facebook page that has almost 4,000 friends on it, and we keep it pretty active. I've had several posts on there this morning, so if you're into Facebook, look us up. You can sign up from that quailresearch.org. And lastly, and I'm going to peruse the list of attendees here real quick because I saw where there were a couple of quail masters. And I suspect they did better on the IQ test than the rest of you did, or I would certainly hope that they would. But anyway, the Quail Masters class is it's basically Bobwhite Brigade for adults. We learned some years ago that we can't work you adults as hard as we do those kids at Bobwhite Brigade. So it's 4 3-day sessions scattered across the state. You get to see the finest quail properties in Texas. And I'm going to do one more of those in 2017. So if you want to be getting Quail Masters, that'll be the last chance under my leadership at least, and be looking for information as we move forward. And with that, Clint, I'd be happy to try to answer any questions as we have them.
All right. We've got a few questions that came in, and I would encourage everybody, we still have some time. Please continue to send us your questions, and we'll get to them in the order they come in. First question is, can you please state again how long chicks feed on insects?
Typically, chicks will feed on insects probably starting at about 3 to 5 days out of the egg, and they'll feed on insects and largely insects for the next 30 days, and then their gizzard will develop and they'll be able to eat some seeds and so forth. They're going to eat insects the rest of their life, but they're especially critical during that first 6 weeks.
Okay. Someone asked how the rainfall this year is compared to last year at Rolling Plains, or in the Rolling Plains.
It's been quite similar. Some areas, especially from in the Abilene area, have probably gotten more rain this year than they had last year at this time. We're sitting at about around 8 inches at the Research Ranch. A lot of other areas, have had 5 to 7 more inches than that, but we're good. Things are as green as a gourd right now. We've had some very mild temperatures. We really haven't had but about 2 or 3 days above 90 degrees. Haven't hit 100 yet, and all those mean that's conducive to large clutches and increased nesting.
All right. This person states that they are a beginner and getting 100 acres north of Gordon, Texas, and they're curious to know if there's anyone with a breed and release program for quail.
Short answer is no. Gordon, as I recall, would be over in Palo Pinto County.
Correct.
You're in that the cross timbers type country. We have tried, as recently as last year, 2 different attempts to translocate wild trap bobwhites. We did that in one site just east of Breckenridge, and it seems to work decently. The site in Palo Pinto County, we just didn't have enough good quail habitat. It was surrounded by oaks everywhere, and our birds didn't do well over there. So at this point in time, really nobody has that equation solved at this point. So we're continuing to work on the translocation of wild trap birds. So I just ask that you keep us tuned in and follow us on that. Pen raised birds, any form or fashion that you try, it ain't going to work for restoring a wild quail population.
Okay, in regards to quail waterers, how much of an impact does it make on quail populations, assuming your grass and habitat are intact?
Probably none. Now, I would say if you get west of the Pecos River, I might change my mind, but if you're in a 15 or 16-inch rainfall zone or more, the presence of water probably isn't going to make much difference. Quail will use water like that, what we call free water if it's available, but they can get the water they need from a combination of preformed water, the dew, the greens, the insects, and metabolic water. Every time they digest a seed, that carbohydrate produces a little bit of water. So water is typically pretty low on our list of management needs, again, especially, I'd say, east of the 16-inch precipitation zone.
Okay. What type of a predator is a roadrunner to quail?
Well, that's a great question. I tell people in the court of public opinion, roadrunners would be lynched. The scientific evidence against them is not very incriminating. There has been one study done down at the Chaparral WMA down in LaSalle County where they looked at about 140 roadrunner stomachs. I think they found evidence of quail in 2 of them. There may be another study. We hope to get a study that we hope to participate in at the Rolling Plains Quail Research Ranch where we get some information available in the West Texas landscape. And at this point in time, we've monitored 2 roadrunner nests back in 2010 with video cameras, and the only thing that they brought to their nest was lizards, grasshoppers, no birds.
Okay. Is there a technique or process to help spur insect numbers?
Several. Prescribed burning can. Anything that increases plant diversity will probably increase insect abundance and diversity. Butyl webisode plant succession. That's one of my favorite webisodes that I've done, and in that webisode I'm featured doing some sweep nets, and you'll see a very graphic difference between a disc strip and a non-disc strip as far as insect abundance.
How should we restrict our harvest of birds according to the amount of acres we can hunt?
Don't shoot any more than you have to, or I don't know how to answer that. That's debatable. I tell you what I do and what me and my buddies do. We play what we call quail snooker. We only shoot the roosters. And if we have a 2-hen limit. So if we mess up and shoot 2 hens, our hunt's over for the day. So there's always an excess of roosters out there. You're not going to find this in the quail books or whatever. But it's a way that we can stretch our quail hunting. Our dogs forgive us if we don't shoot at a bird when we yell a hen. And it's more challenging. It's like the game of snooker versus 8-ball. It's a more challenging game.
Okay, it looks like we've got one more. Do you have any predictions for the Lubbock area this year? Had a great amount of birds and rain last year, and the rain has continued this far. Your thoughts so far?
Well, I'm giddy. I am excited. I try to contain my enthusiasm. I said we can't possibly see the increase that we saw last year. But the conditions at this point are incredible. We carried a lot of breeding birds into the breeding season. Our nesting has gone very well to this point. We've had remarkable weather. This El Nino cycle has stayed on. The forecasters are saying it's going to transition into La Nina in the summer. So it just depends on how hot and dry it gets from the middle of June to the middle of September, because if it stays cool, we'll continue to raise birds throughout that period. If we hit a hot and dry period, that'll put a pretty short and abrupt halt to the nesting.
All right. We will we'll pause on those questions for now. I think we covered them all. If anybody has any additional questions, please feel free to continue to post them. I'm going to post a link in the chat window right now. Bear with me just 1 second. Link in the chat window is to all the quail posts that were mentioned today. That's all of them in one spot as a playlist on YouTube, and so you can access them there. I think there's 23 of them, so you can spend a good deal of time going back over some of this information as well as some additional information.
Clint?
Yes, sir.
If I may ask, for those of you that are attending, again, we've got a pretty good library of webisodes, and I encourage you to watch them all. But if you have ideas for something, a subject that is not covered, that you'd like to see covered, please pass that along to me or to Clint, and we'll see if we can't get that on the production schedule for the next year.
Okay. Can I share your email address on
Absolutely.
the chat window? All right. That one is Dr. Rollins, and let me share my own. All right, there's mine. So please feel free to send that to either one of us. Several people have asked. Some people have had to jump off already, but we will archive this webinar. So I just posted the link up. You can go back and watch this webinar again. And probably sometime next week I'll have it up and running. So go back. You can watch this one and all of our other webinars that we've covered so far. Our next webinar is going to be on June 16th. It's going to be on comprehensive range and wildlife management. It'll be presented by Chip Ruthven of Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. Looks like we may have had another question come in. Nope, just someone saying thanks for the webinar. I'll also like to post up a link to the Texas Wildlife Association webpage and the Texas Wildlife Association membership link. If you'd like to look into TWA, see what we're all about, or become a member, you can go there to our membership page and learn more about it there. I don't see any other questions that have come in. Dr. Rollins, do you have anything else to add?
I don't think so. Again, looking forward to a great quail year, so I encourage you to spend as much time as you can on the back 40. If you see interesting things, please send me a short email and a picture, and we'll share that on our Facebook page for the rest of us students of quail.
Okay, I do. We had one more that squeezed in. Can you please discuss multiple hatches?
Quail will, let's first contrast multiple hatches with multiple attempts to hatch. For example, if a quail's sitting on a nest right now and that nest gets depredated, it gets disturbed, and the hen is still alive, the hen doesn't get killed, which will happen about 20% of the time when the nest is depredated. But if she's still alive, she will go right back to nesting, and within probably 3 weeks, she's going to be sitting, or 4 weeks, she's going to be sitting on eggs again. So they will re-nest 3-4 times if conditions are good. In terms of actual double nest or triple nest, where the same hen is responsible for raising one or more broods, that happens. It happened apparently quite a bit last year, where we had quite a bit of what we call gang brooding, where the hen would put the rooster on the nest, finish up incubation, she'd go off and find another boyfriend and raise another clutch of young. We used to think that quail were like Ozzie and Harriet, for those of you that are old enough to remember the Nelsons, but they've adapted more to our traditional or conventional lifestyle. We don't recommend that for our kids. In quail, I guess we could condone it. But they will re-nest, they will double clutch, and given the right conditions, like we had last year and like we're having right now, we could see multiple nesting attempts. Typically no more than 2. 3, the record as far as I know is 4 nests produced by the same hen. And I often chide my colleagues at A&M, they want to clone something, they clone a sheep. I said, if you're going to clone something, let's get that hen and clone her.
Looks like one more. Does the cold weather affect the hatch in any way?
Well, it would. I don't think it's been that cold yet. It was 55 here in San Angelo this morning. It's been cool and kind of wet the last several days. Just have to wait and see. But I'm not pessimistic at this point in time. I mean, if we were getting down to low 40s with this kind of moisture, I'd say yes. But it hasn't been that cold yet, at least here in west central Texas.
All right. I think with that, we'll wrap it up. I will leave this. I'll leave the window up for a while if y'all want to go back through, read some of the questions, or grab any of those links that we have posted up. So feel free to grab those. Dr. Rollins, I greatly appreciate it. As always, wealth of information, and it'll be a wonderful resource for us to have archived.
Well, thank you for your assistance, Clint.